just a reminder to everyone on our one. Okay. Ms. Lightfoot, Ms. Preckwinkle, alphabetically. Welcome to the Chicago Tribune.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for talking to our readers and viewers who submitted some of our questions. We also welcome an online audience that includes a lot of students and a lot of voters. Only one ground rule, as always, if someone strays into talking points and starts to filibuster, don't take it personally when we steer you back. For extreme situations, we have the bell. If we can just start off. Each of you has said plenty about one another's past. Our focus today, we'd like you to focus on Chicago's future. It's been 36 years since anyone addressed someone as Madam Mayor. And in 2 months, that's what one of you will be. That's who one of you will be. So our first question, if I can ask each of you to take a minute or so, tell us, if you do take office in 2 months, what are your must-do priorities for the first 100 days? What are the things you want Chicagoans to expect from you? What can Chicagoans hold you to as you set a tone for your 4 years? Let's go in verse alphabetically this time. President Preckwinkle, your first 100 days in office.
Thank you very much. You know, I think every elected official in the state has to focus on growing our economy. That has to be a priority. And we also have to do that in a context of providing opportunity and equity for all of our residents. So I think it's really important that we make clear that the job of the mayor is to be sure that our city grows. We can't thrive unless we grow. People leave our city because they can't find jobs. They don't think there's opportunity for themselves and for their children. And we have to be sure that as we focus on growth, it's not just downtown and the airports and the convention center, which are the three legs of the economic development framework for our city, but it also has to focus on neighborhoods. And I've talked consistently about the importance of neighborhoods because that's what I hear from people as I go around the city. When people came to talk to me about moving into the 4th Ward, they said, are the streets safe and are the schools good? And I always talk about the importance of having great neighborhood public schools. And in order to do that, we have to be sure that our schools are well-resourced. And well-resourced means not relying entirely on the per pupil allocation, but resourcing schools according to their needs. And many of our schools need bilingual support, they need social workers, they need psychologists, wraparound services for the kids to do well. That's the first thing, focusing on neighborhood public schools and being sure that they're well resourced. The second thing is we have to be sure that we invest in neighborhoods that have seen disinvestment and neglect for decades. And many of our communities on the south and west side can be characterized in that way. When I was alderman, we built hundreds of units of affordable housing. We've got to put in place a plan to build more public housing, not public housing, but affordable housing all across our city. And that has to be a priority. Not only prioritizing housing development, but also supporting our small and medium-sized businesses in our neighborhoods. And I've proposed increasing our investments in micro-lending and also in programs that support grants to start businesses, to sustain businesses, and to build them. I also think it's important that we address the violence. You know, early on in my teaching career, I lost a student to gun violence. She was killed in a drive-by shooting. And people have to feel safe in their neighborhoods, and they have to feel safe in their communities. And the only way that we can achieve that is for people to be willing to collaborate and work with the police, and that means having more confidence in the police. We need to invest in community policing. We need to invest in supervision and better supervision and training for our officers, and we need to hold them accountable for performance.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lightfoot, your first 100 days in office.
Sure. Well, let me answer that question by kind of framing where we will be at that moment. If I'm fortunate enough to become the next mayor, that happens on April 2nd. The swearing in isn't until the middle of May. By that time, we will be in the midst of the summer violence season. So for me, if I'm fortunate enough to win that night, on April 2nd, that night I'm reaching out to Eddie Johnson and scheduling a meeting with his executive team for the next day to make sure that we have a true and robust plan to make sure that we're tackling violence and keeping people safe all over. I think that's critically important, and as I've said before, and I think you all agree, the violence is really the framing issue, sadly, for everything else that we're going to try to accomplish. We can't have great neighborhood schools. We're not going to get business to invest. We're not going to be able to address the outrageously high unemployment, the lack of jobs, and other things that are plaguing neighborhoods all over the south and the west sides in particular, if we do not have a robust plan for violence. And the timing of when the next mayor takes office, I think, dictates that that's got to be the top priority. The other thing that I think we have to do, again, with that time frame in mind, is make sure that we have a very clear Springfield agenda. The General Assembly's work is going to be done by May 31st. It's critically important that early on we collaborate, frankly, with the existing administration, but we chart our own course for what the Springfield agenda has to be for the city of Chicago. The other thing that's obviously important is the next mayor takes office in the middle of the budget cycle, and you have essentially 3 months to come up with the budget for the next year and obviously address municipal finance challenges now and in the future, and clearly the pension issue looms really large. So what I would be doing as part of the transition is making sure that I am identifying to the public members of my team who are going to tackle and take on a number of these challenges. Obviously, as a leader of the city, I will set the vision and the agenda for what that looks like, but we've got to make very big, strong moves quickly.
Good enough. Thank you. I believe Kristen McQuarrie has some questions about the next council.
I do. I just have a couple broad ones, and then I'd like to get more specific on just how you kind of foresee your interaction with the next council. We seem to get into a cycle every mayoral election where people are clamoring for change. They want to see a stronger city council that is a check on the mayor's office, not just an extension of the mayor's office. So could you describe first what kind of breaking from the past looks like to you as it relates to the mayor's office and the council? And then I have some specific questions on committee chairmanships. Okay. Would you like to start?
Well, I may cover some of those things in my answer. Number one, we have to get rid of automatic prerogative. I think, frankly, that's a line of demarcation between me and President Preckwinkle. If you look at, as you have, the number of aldermen that have been prosecuted and found liable for federal crimes over the years, 30 plus, the common thread that weaves among all of them is doing something in the exercise of automatic prerogative or privilege that is a shakedown and is a problem. The corruption in our city continues to be real. One of the biggest issues is aldermanic prerogative, and it's not the things that we know. So if you look at, for example, the Ed Burke criminal complaint, there's a lot of things there that really speak to this issue. But what we also don't know and don't see is literally probably the tens of thousands, if not millions, of interactions that aldermen have every single day with average citizens, where they've got to go to the alderman and kiss the ring and give more to get access to basic city services. That is a corrosive and corrupting influence that we have to fundamentally change. I think we also have to challenge the city council, frankly, to be an independent oversight body that it hasn't performed. And one place where I will start, in addition to getting rid of aldermanic prerogative, is the city council has to have its own lawyer. That's an in the weeds issue, but right now, the corporation counsel is counsel for the mayor, counsel for the executive branch, and lawyer for the city council. That makes no sense. There's I've been a lawyer for 30 plus years. That is an obvious conflict. We can't have the same lawyer serving all sorts of different interests that may or may not be aligned at the same time. So that is something that I will put in place from day one.
What do you foresee aldermen using a lawyer for? Advice, or I mean, they have a board of ethics,
for example,
they have-
I mean, there's lots of different issues that come before the city that the corporation council has to weigh in on, and the aldermen look to the corporation council alone to help them navigate those. It's everything from, frankly, police settlements and judgments and attorney's fees. It's issues regarding development, bonding. All of those issues are issues that intersect with the law department, but where the same lawyer is giving advice and counsel to the mayor and to the executive branches as well as the city council. That makes no sense to me. That's a fundamental conflict that has to be resolved, and it's, in my view, it's got to be resolved by the city council having its own council. But that raises a larger issue of how can the city council really perform meaningful oversight on issues of importance, not just to their individual wards, but to citywide issues. I don't fear a active and engaged city council that is involved in doing its oversight responsibilities. I think that's something that, frankly, is in the best interest of residents and citizens and taxpayers, so that, frankly, they're not rubber stamping something that goes along. And I'm comfortable with having that kind of relationship, and the challenge of building relationships with, frankly, a city council that's going to look very different than what it looks now.
Let me just ask you a follow-up on aldermanic privilege. There's one thing to abuse it, but there's another factor. Obviously, you live in the city. Don't you want your alderman to have a louder voice in making sure that, like, a liquor license doesn't go where it doesn't belong? Someone who's on the ground, knows block by block each ward, not somebody who's up in planning and development.
That's not inconsistent with getting rid of aldermanic prerogative. Of course, the aldermen are, if they're doing their job right, which is a caveat. If they're doing their job right, they should know exactly what's going on in the neighborhood. They should be able to articulate the viewpoint of people and residents in that ward. Nothing about eliminating aldermanic prerogative says aldermen don't have an opportunity to weigh in. It doesn't say that they don't have a voice. It doesn't say that they don't have notice. All those things must function. But what I'm saying is that at its core, the worst part of aldermanic prerogative is that on big city issues like affordable housing, like other crises that we have to tackle and solve, as a city, you got 50 different people with 50 different perspectives playing Caesar and saying yay or nay. And I've talked to individual residents, I've talked to small business owners in particular who are most directly affected by this, and frankly larger corporations who say this is a problem and it inhibits our ability to move forward. Of course, aldermen have to play a critical role in being the eyes and ears and advocates for their residents.
But not being able to overrule a liquor license.
Not unilaterally.
Or...
Not unilaterally.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Let me let the Madam President jump in.
Well, I think the critical issue really is that the mayor has a vision for the city, which is shared with the council. And I think that's the most important thing. You know, I served in the body for 19 years. It's really important that the mayor provide direction and collaborate with the members of the city council to achieve the goals that the mayor's outlined. The first thing I think is that the city council should organize itself. I mean, the quite odd history of the city of Chicago is the mayor organizes the city council. And I think, you know, I can't think of another legislative body for which that's true. So the body has to organize itself. And that means taking leadership of that process, which is will be out of the ordinary for many of the members. But I think that's critical. I think it's critical too to ban outside employment. I mean, the real challenge we have is that constituents don't know if their alderman has outside employment, whether they're serving them or their clients. And we have to be quite clear that no outside employment is allowed for city elected officials. You have to serve your constituents and not your clients. And let me just say, as I said, I was an alderman for 19 years. Aldermen are the people, the elected officials who are closest to their constituents. They have the smallest districts. They know their communities well. And community residents rely on them, not just for city services, but when I was alderman, people would come in and ask for help in finding housing. They would ask for help in getting their kids into one of the neighborhood schools that maybe was a selective enrollment school. They would ask for help with mail delivery. We spent a lot of time trying to deal with the vagaries of mail delivery. There are all kinds of services that aldermanic offices provide, uncharacteristic of legislative bodies elsewhere in the country, that are really critical to the people in their community. One of my colleagues used to say that aldermen are the first line of defense, that people come to their aldermanic offices before they go to their state rep or their state senator or their county commissioner. They go to their aldermanic office for services because constituent service has always been the hallmark of an aldermanic office in the city of Chicago. And I think that's good for the communities because the wards are small enough that people can go in and talk to their aldermen, go in and talk to their aldermanic staff. They can see their aldermen out in the community. And I think that's one of the strengths of our system, that we have a body where the districts are small enough that people have a good opportunity to meet and to know their elected representatives personally and to get service of a variety of kinds in those aldermanic offices.
Do you think, I'm sorry to jump in. I want to be clear. So do you support aldermanic privilege in its current form?
I believe that aldermen should have the obligation to serve their constituents and to serve them in their best interest. And let me just say, liquor licenses are a perfect example. I mean, one of the things I did when I was alderman is work with community residents to try to rescind liquor licenses for establishments that were problematic. Not just selling alcohol, but the drug dealing and other illicit activity that sometimes went on around these establishments. We made it a policy, actually, to try to dramatically reduce the number of liquor licenses in our ward because so many of them were problematic businesses. So I think having an alderman who has the responsibility for serving their constituents in all of the ways that I just described has worked to the benefit of their constituents.
Do you think there are weaknesses, though, where if it is abused, it can lead to corruption, where we're talking about awnings and signage and things that actually an alderman shouldn't be weighing in on?
I think that the critical issue, as I said, is the mayoral vision, and the second critical issue is outside employment. I think if the mayor has a strong vision and works with the members of the city council to achieve that vision on behalf of all the people of Chicago, and outside employment is prohibited, a lot of the challenges that we have presently will be diminished.
I just have to say, look, let's again be mindful of the environment in which we are in. We have a sitting city alderman, Danny Solis, who wore a wire for 2 years. That is unprecedented in the history of public corruption in our city. There is no doubt in my mind that in the coming days, weeks at the most, we're going to see a series of indictments that come down from my former colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it is going to center around this issue of aldermanic prerogative. We need to be on the right side of history on this issue. And again, it's not that aldermen won't be able to perform many functions to be the advocate for people in their wards. It's not that aldermen won't be able to weigh in on liquor licenses and other mundane things. But no alderman should have that kind of power where people feel like the only way that they can get basic city services and get business done in a ward is to kiss the ring of the alderman. That's fundamentally the problem. That is corrosive. And again, if I'm lucky enough to be the next mayor, I'm going to drive a stake through the heart of that. Absolutely, there's no reason why people should be taking on other jobs and responsibilities that are in conflict with their solemn obligation to serve the public. But we know that there are literally tens of thousands of contacts every single year between constituents and aldermen that are below the radar screen, that are fundamentally problematic and make it much more difficult for people to get access to city services and get business done. And we have got to stop that and streamline that.
Let me just say, I served as alderman for 19 years. I actually have experience doing the job. And that's not true. I mean, the overwhelming majority of the work you do is pretty mundane. It's connecting people to city services. It's intervening in ways that I just described. And frankly, I think it's a derogatory characterization of aldermen and the work that they do and their staffs. And it's true that we've had some challenges with people who've misused their power. That's always going to be the case in any human enterprise. But aldermanic staffs and aldermen work hard to serve their constituents. And if you in every election, they have to stand before their constituents and seek re-election. I mean, there's a process in place, namely an electoral process, to give people an opportunity to make corrections if they think that their alderman is not performing. And that's what we call elections.
I have to ask one last question or two, and the answer on the committee structure, because so much of the work of the council gets done in committee. You talked about allowing the council to kind of let those committee chairmanships bubble up. Normally it's sort of a list from City Hall and then a nod from whatever's going on in the council. But are you willing to take a lead role in shaking up those chairmanships? Or are you still comfortable with, I think in the last meeting you said you were comfortable with O'Connor continuing as Finance Committee Chair as long as he followed the rules of moving workers' comp out, but we have Michelle Harris heading back, we have Carrie Austin heading back, possibly O'Connor heading back, Burke heading back. How willing are you to take a lead role in pushing for change on those chairmanships?
So would you ask the governor if he would push for change in the chairmanships of the state legislature?
If he was in charge of making those committee chairmanships like Speaker Madigan is, yes, I would.
But Speaker Madigan is a member of the body, he's not the executive.
No,
so I guess
you have
my
a bully
point is,
pulpit.
no, yes, but my point is, there's a difference between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and that line has been blurred in Chicago for a very long time because the executive chooses basically the committee chairs and the committees that people serve on. I think that's undemocratic, and I think it's contrary to our system of, three branches of government, each of which has specific responsibilities. So, I'd be perfectly willing, and I have worked with the legislative body around chairmanships and committees. Actually, I've worked with Chairman John Daly. He talks to people, I talk to people about what committee chairmanships they want and what committees they want to serve on, and we come up with a list. It's a collaborative process, but it's not a situation where the executive branch directs entirely the committee memberships and committee chairmanships in the body, which for the 20 years that I served there was the case.
Do you think it worked well?
No, it worked to the interest of the executive. It didn't work to the interest of the legislative body. And the point, of course, is to have a strong legislative body. I think that is in the interest of all the people of Chicago, that we have a strong executive and that we have a strong legislative body, and that hasn't been the case. We've had a city council that basically was organized by the executive branch and directed almost entirely by the executive branch. It hasn't served effectively as an independent body. Let me just give an example. So I voted against the parking meters. Okay, there were 5 votes. This was a terrible idea. It was an asset sale, and we spent the money in like 4 or 5 years, and we turned the streets over for what, 99? It was a terrible idea, but there were only 5 votes against it. I was one of those 5 votes. It seems to me if the legislative body were stronger and wasn't under the direct thumb of the mayor, there would have been more people who questioned this kind of sale of our city assets. So my argument is that we need a stronger legislative body, and that means they need to organize themselves.
So you will stay out of that?
No, I said in the county side, I talked to the commissioners. Chairman Daly, who's chairman of finance, talked to the commissioners. They indicated what committees they wanted to be on. I talked to him and worked with him. It was a collaborative process, and people basically got the committees and the chairmanships they wanted. However, that's different from just having the executive just decide what committees everyone's going to serve on and who's going to be the chairs of the committee. So a collaborative process, I think, makes sense, but a process which we've had for as long as I can remember, in which the executive branch chooses the leadership in the committees that people serve on, doesn't serve the interests of the people of Chicago.
Okay, thank you.
We have to have fundamental change. The status quo, which Madam President just described, has failed people all over the city. The issue isn't about having the legislative branch serve itself. It's about serving the people. That's what the city should be about. That's what public service should be about. And of course, we have to have term limits. There should be term limits on committee chairmanships. And then we don't have Ed Burke basically monetizing the finance committee for his own purposes. We have to have turnover in chairmanship so that we don't have Danny Solis doing God knows what with God knows whom, which unfortunately leads us to having the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI being the oversight body for the city of Chicago. That has to fundamentally change. And of course, that means we have to restructure the way in which we do most everything in city government, and particularly around how the legislative branch functions, how it conducts its business, how chairmanships are selected, how they stay. All of those things, I think, have to be on the table.
But so does on the table to you mean that you will do what the president is saying, where you will work collaboratively to see who wants to be on what committees, or will you push for change among some of those really coveted spots? And I am talking about Carrie Austin over budget.
Yeah, well, look, my name's Lightfoot, not Caesar, right? So I'm going to work collaboratively with the legislative body, of course. But I'm going to have very strong opinions, as I always have, as articulated when I put forward my good government plan back in August of last year about the changes that are fundamentally necessary to make the government more transparent, more accountable, and more accessible to the public. To give you one example, why on earth are we still having a continuous fight about televising committee meetings and the city council? In this day of technology, when people should be able to consume news and information about how their government is functioning, we should see that. They should be able to see who actually shows up and who doesn't, how the council conducts its business. All of those things are fundamentally important, and I am absolutely going to weigh in and have a point of view about making the government much more responsive to the people.
And by the way, the county board meetings and committee meetings are all televised.
If we can pivot in a third direction, Mike Love, has some questions about the economic growth issues that President Preckwinkle mentioned at the get-go.
Thank you. You both mentioned, as you sat down, the idea of the importance of job creation and having employers in the city. We write about it all the time, and so we both noticed right away when you started talking about that. Jobs create opportunity. Jobs create tax revenue. Because people who work pay taxes. Jobs give people a reason to stay here or leave. It's a great big active city out there, and what we'd like to know is, in as much detail as you can as provide, as mayor, what are you going to do to promote and protect the great big global economy of the city, because the future depends on it? Ms. Lightfoot, please.
Sure. I actually, just as President Preckwinkle did, came from the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. As I said to them, there's this buzz around, well, I don't know about Lightfoot. I don't know where she stands on these issues. Look, I spent a lot of my adult working years as a senior equity partner at this little boutique law firm called Mayer Brown, which is one of the 25 largest law firms in the world. I've spent a significant amount of time advising CEOs and other C-suite personnel, frankly, on matters of incredible importance to them in the intersection between civil and criminal regulatory matters, where, frankly, those are some of their toughest days. So I have a sense of, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a business person, but I have a sense of what business wants, which is a stable economy, the ability to grow, and predictability. So we have to make sure that we continue to provide that kind of environment for businesses to grow. I think one of our strategies as a city should be getting back to 3 million people in population. You've heard me say this before. The fact that we're losing population, and we're one of the few metropolitan areas in the country that's doing so, I think it should be the proverbial canary in the mine shaft for us. How do we get there? We get there by continuing focusing on the growth of our downtown area. That's important. We need to make sure that we continue to provide opportunity for tourism to grow and flourish. That's also important. But we also cannot ignore what's happening in neighborhoods south of Roosevelt Road and west of Ashland. We cannot be a great global city if we continue to have neighborhoods that are plagued by 25% unemployment, where so many of our kids are living in poverty, and where fear of gun violence is the rule of the day and is the constant companion of young people growing up. I know that we can do both, and this false narrative of it's one, meaning bet on the downtown and ignore the neighborhoods, that is a binary choice that we don't have to make. We must do both. We have to focus like a laser beam on building up small businesses in our neighborhoods for the obvious reason. They hire people from the neighborhoods. Their very presence in the neighborhoods is a stabilizing force. And how do we do that as a city? Right now, today, we could do a number of things that would, I think, add jet fuel to the small business economy here. Number one, the city of Chicago spends every year about $2 billion in goods and services. We need to make sure that some of those contracting opportunities are truly going to small businesses so that the contracts are small enough they can continue to build wealth. And frankly, when we give those contracts to them, we actually have to pay them in a timely fashion so that they're not carrying the freight of waiting 60, 90, 120 days to get paid, because no small business can thrive in that environment. We also have to think about, for other larger businesses, this question of supplier diversity, and that's a nice way of saying, who do you hire when you're doing work in the private sector? Are you providing opportunities for small businesses, for minority-owned and women-owned businesses? I think by just calling that question as part of our presence in the procurement market will make a big difference. A lot of companies are already on board with that and are doing it, but I think we have to make that as a priority for ourselves. We have to use the bully pulpit of the mayor's office to provide access to capital and lower the thresholds for small businesses to get access to capital. Again, I've spoken to bankers and said, if I'm fortunate enough to become the next mayor, we will have a conversation about how we can provide lines of credit and other loans for small businesses to either expand and grow or to take an idea that an entrepreneur has to turn it into reality. The other thing that I think the city has to do is we have this Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, which right now is a matching grant. Well, what I've heard from small businesses all over the city is this: if I don't have a $100,000 line of credit, I don't have the ability to get a loan for that amount. It does me no good to get a matching grant that I actually can't take advantage of. So I think we've got to convert that program into a true grant program. I think we've got to emphasize a lot more on micro-lending that's been successful, frankly, on a small scale here, but also in other cities and countries around the world, and really bring that to Chicago. Another thing that I think is critically important, I'll finish this thought and then I'll take a breath. What small businesses need is support and resources. We need to think about ways in which we can bring incubator spaces, not necessarily on the scale of 1871, but akin to 1871, to neighborhoods all over the city. There are neighborhoods here, particularly on the south side, where they don't even have Wi-Fi. They don't have the kind of connectivity that they need for businesses to grow and thrive. And I think the city has to have skin in that game to help solve some of those problems, bring people together at the incubator level, and use, frankly, professional services, volunteers who are willing to donate their sweat equity to help aid businesses that are trying to develop a marketing plan, a business plan, work on a pitch, those kind of basic things that are important for small businesses that they don't otherwise have access to.
Thank you very much. Ms. Preckwinkle, I'm sorry. Like to hear your thoughts. You know we obsess on these things. Are we right, or tell us we're wrong to obsess on them? What would your philosophy be as mayor?
Well, I began by talking about the importance of both growth and equity, that we have to focus laser-like on growing our local economy, but we also have to be sure that the benefits accrue to people in all of our communities. And we have some real challenges at the moment because many of our neighborhoods are struggling with disinvestment and neglect at the same time that the downtown glitters and sparkles. And I'm not suggesting that we don't need to put energy and focus in downtown and the airports and McCormick Place, which are the sort of three legs of the economic development engine for our city, but we also have to focus on our neighborhoods. But let me talk about our workforce first. I'm a proponent of a $15 an hour minimum wage, and I have a plan to implement it by 2021, which of course would require city council approval and support, and I would work for that. The new paradigm, the new economic paradigm, is that companies want to go to places where there's a diverse and talented labor pool, and workers want to go to places where the wages are good. So raising the minimum wage both supports the idea that people will come here because the wages are good, and will also attract businesses. So $15 an hour minimum wage, the fight for 15. Balanced development, as I said. We have to have investments in our neighborhoods. We can't focus only on downtown and the airports and McCormick Place if we're going to have a world-class city. We can't have a world-class city without strong neighborhoods, and that means investing in them. We've talked about small and medium-sized businesses. I worked with small and medium-sized businesses when I was alderman, and they have some real challenges. What I've proposed is that the city contribute more, actually triple its investment, in the Chicago Micro Lending Institute, CMI, which is a public-private partnership between the banks and the city, and it's loans of $500 to $50,000. So it's very modest loans. And the other thing we have to do, as she said, is change the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, which historically has been a rebate program. So you put the money out, then you get the money back. But if your challenge is access to capital, you don't have it in the first place, so it doesn't make sense. It's got to be a grant program. And I've talked repeatedly about both those things, the importance of microlending and the importance of the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund as a grant program and not as a rebate program. One of the things we focused on in the county is improving MBE and WBE participation, minority business enterprise, women's business enterprise. And we did that, interestingly enough, by investing initially in technology. We've made $300 million in technology investments in a very difficult period economically, because we knew that we had to have a better handle on our data. We had to know what we were doing, how well we were doing. We were in a position where we didn't know until the end of contracts whether or not people had met their MB and WB requirements, and then we could only fine them. And what we really needed to do, of course, was ensure participation all the way along. We don't want to be in the business of fining people for failure to perform. We want people to be inclusive. So we put a lot of energy into ensuring that we have the appropriate information to be sure that we're meeting our MBE, WBE goals, and that we have a very inclusive process, and we're not just pretending that people get work and then we find out at the end that they're not. And let me talk about the things that I've done as president of the county. We did not have a Bureau of Economic Development until I created one. We had departments that operated in silos: community development, capital planning, building and zoning, and they were not coordinated. We wanted a holistic approach to economic development in the county, and so we created a Bureau of Economic Development to begin to do that. I also created a Council of Economic Advisors. 24 business leaders, led now by John Rogers, that focus not just on helping us do better with our own resources, although that was part of their charge. How can we do better with the resources we have, the tax incentive programs and so on, but how can we also relate better to the business community? And they insisted that we look at the role that county could play globally, and that led us to work with the 7 counties of northeastern Illinois, bring together the political leaders, the business leaders, and the economic development professionals, which had never been done before. There's always been competition. Work together collaboratively to see how we could lift our region, which is the economic engine of the state. And the Council of Economic Advisors recommended that the county take that leadership role, and I did. And we now have the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation, which is focused on helping small and medium-sized firms export more because they have a better growth trajectory when they do that. Working with metal fabricators, because metal fabricators are strong in the 7-county region, to help them build capacity. Encouraging foreign direct investment in our region, because we're part of the regional economy. And then finally, working on transportation, distribution, and logistics, overweight and oversized trucks, because we're the capital of the Midwest. There's lots of long-distance trucking that comes through our region, and also there's lots of internal truck traffic.
Let me ask a follow-up to get, I'd like to get more specific here about what each of you would do as mayor to help employers, convince employers to stay or grow here. Let's say your first day on the job, you get a phone call, and it's Jeff Bezos from Amazon. He's rethinking those those 25,000 jobs he doesn't know where to put. Are you interested? Do you take the call? What do you tell someone like Jeff Bezos that under your administration, it would be wise for him to make that investment?
Here's the thing, the county was part of the plan. It was the city, the county, and the state, which offered a plan to Amazon to come to our city. And I think that was a good thing for us to do. It's really important that we try to attract firms like Amazon to our region. And let me just say, we need to support and build and grow our own businesses, but we cannot ignore opportunities like the one that Amazon provided. And so, of course, I would take the call. I would encourage him to come. We would do everything we could to sell our city. It's important that we pursue attraction strategies. We just have to be very, very diligent to be sure that we're maximizing the opportunity for the residents, and not just handing money to the developer or the new company that's coming in.
Ms. Lightfoot, I asked the question about job growth, and your answer kind of veered pretty quickly into talking about procurement. So I want to get back to this idea of someone like Bezos on the phone.
I think my answer was about growing small businesses who hire more people than any other company in our economy. And if you look at the focus that has happened over the last 7 years, we haven't focused on small businesses. And it's critically important that we do that. This issue comes up every time I'm in a conversation about economic development, growing our economy. There is always a question, or if not more, about small businesses. So that's the issue that I was actually speaking to. It's not just about jobs. It's about providing employers with the opportunity to hire people in our neighborhoods, to provide stability, to provide hiring, to cut down on transportation costs, and make sure that in areas of the city that haven't seen the kind of investment that they should, that we have people that are owners of those small businesses who have a stake in the future of those communities and who hire from those communities. So I think that's fundamentally important to economic development in the city. And on Bezos, of course you take the call. But we have to make sure that we are, this is one point that I agree with President Preckwinkle on. We can't give away the store. We can't lure these kinds of businesses, large or small, to our city at any cost. I would like to say to an Amazon, this is a great city. Here's all the reasons why you ought to be here. But I want you to partner with us and help us address and solve some of the challenges that we also have. And frankly, having advised Fortune 50 companies for a number of years in my role at Mayor Brown, I don't know that any company that wants to come into any city that doesn't want to be a good corporate citizen. But I think it's incumbent upon the mayor to set the terms of that engagement and how they can help be a good corporate citizen in ways that actually move the needle for residents in the city.
Thank you. I'd like to make one more pivot. The Civic Federation, I'm sorry, Lawrence, the Civic Federation is out this morning with 92 pages, which essentially says, woe to whoever wins this, woe to whichever of you wins this election. Among the problems, which we spoke with each of you about when you were here before, is the immediate need for an additional $270 million for the pension bump, which quickly escalates by your fourth year
to $1 billion.
Extra billion.
Yep.
Can we ask you, what tax increases or spending cuts are you going to propose to us when we hope one of you is back to talk about your 2020 budget in a few months, to pick up that 270 and also Civic Fed talks about the structural deficit that's a recurring theme.
I'm happy to go. Look, as you well know, there's no magic solution. From the very beginning of my campaign, when I announced last May of 2018 I spent time talking with Lawrence Massal and his colleagues at the Civic Federation, and I've talked to everybody in between, including State Senator Dan Biss, the people who have really been in the trenches on this pension issue for a number of years. Look, I don't support a constitutional amendment. And it really that is born of my experience growing up in a small steel town in the 60s and 70s where a lot of men lost their pensions when the steel industry tanked. I think pensions have to be a promise, but that puts us in a difficult and precarious situation. We're going to have a conversation about revenue. There's no two ways about it. But I think before we get there,
What does that mean?
it means that we're going to have to find what I hope are progressive sources of revenue to be able to meet the challenges that we have, not only in the structural deficit in the budget, but also to meet our pension obligation next year.
A city, sounds like a city income tax?
No, I do not
When you
support
say
it.
a progressive-
If I can, I'll explain it to you. I think we have to build the case for revenue. And how we build the case for revenue is demonstrating to taxpayers that we're no longer going to treat them like an ATM machine without limit. We can't have the assumption that this box called city government is what it is, and we just have to have more revenue to fuel it. We have to do things like, for example, and this is an issue that I've talked at length about, get a handle on the outrageous costs that we're spending on police settlements, judgments, and attorneys' fees to the tune of $50 to $60 million every single year. $500 million over the last 7 years, which, as you know, we have to go into the bond market and borrow at our terrible credit rating. There's no sense of urgency, amazingly, around this issue. It's a huge problem. It frankly delegitimizes not only the police department, but city government. We've got to get a handle on that. We also have to look at ways in which we can make city government also run more efficiently. I think we have to ask the question, do we really need a separate clerk's office and treasurer's offices? Do we really need to be spending money on redundant services, frankly, all over city government that could more efficiently be handled by the executive branch? I think those are fair questions that we have to put on the table. We have to look at the pension funds themselves. We have 4 separate pension funds. Each of them has its own separate administrative function. Each of those has its own separate investment function. If we look to consolidating some of those functions, we could have an extra $30 million every year that we could put back into the pension funds themselves. Now, that doesn't get us all the way to the big numbers that we're talking about. I think, frankly, we have to have conversations with our friends in Springfield about whether or not they can help us address some of these urgent needs. We're coming off of the largest property tax increase in our history that just ended in 2018, and we still have a broken and corrupt system, frankly, perpetrated by Joe Barrios. So we've got to fix that system as well before we go back to low-income homeowners in particular and say, we're going to raise your property taxes. So that's what I mean when I talk about building the case for revenue. And I'm not going to sit here today and tell you, here's what we have to do, here's the specific revenue sources, but it's something that I'm very focused on and that we have to have solutions for. But let me just finish by saying this. We can't keep balancing the budget on the backs of low-income and working-class families. That has to stop. But we also can't do things that have been proposed that are going to drive businesses out of our city.
Before I give President Preckwinkle a shot at that, if I can ask you, you spoke a couple of places about redundancies. I believe the phrase you used was redundancies in city services. Are there things in particular that bug you, or things that you see 5 departments doing that?
Yeah.
Is there anything that comes to mind?
I mean, I've talked at some of them. We don't have a risk management system in our city. So we were a $9.5 billion budget, just in the corporate budget, not counting the sister agencies. I don't know any business of that size with that kind of budget that doesn't have somebody whose job it is to identify and mitigate risk. You know, the city's inspector general does, I think, a fantastic job of doing audits and really teeing up a number of ways that we could be innovative and have cost savings, and they go essentially into the circular file because nobody picks them up and runs with them. I'm going to change that. The Inspector General recommended now almost 2 years ago that we hire and empower a risk manager. If I'm fortunate enough to become the next mayor, as part of the transition, one of the first people that I will announce is who the next risk manager is going to be.
Great. President Preckwinkle, thanks for your patience.
Thank you. So I always begin by talking about the importance of looking at this through an equity lens. You know, we need a progressive income tax at the state level. And the reason is not simply to address the fiscal challenges that the state has, but also because the state shares revenue through the local government distributive fund and other sources with cities, towns, and villages. And we want that revenue to be raised as equitably as possible. And one of the challenges we have, of course, with our property tax system, which local governments rely on all across the state, is that it's inherently inequitable. It focuses on residential properties and not industrial and commercial properties. The burden falls disproportionately on them. And without adequate state resources and support, local governments will continue to rely disproportionately on the property tax. So that's a real challenge. We need a graduated income tax at the state level so that when the revenue is shared with local units of government, we know that it's raised more equitably. And let me just say, when I came into office in 2010, we had a $487 million budget gap to close. $487 million, $500 million. And what we did, I brought in each of the 11 separately elected officials and said, you have to cut your budget 15%. You have to cut your budget. We refinanced some of our debt. As I said, in one of the difficult decisions I've had to make, we laid off 1,500 people. There was no magic solution. There was no silver bullet. It was shared sacrifice. But we closed that budget deficit. And we closed the budget deficit of more than $300 million the next year. And actually, over the course of the last 8 years, we've closed $2.1 billion in budget deficits. We've made $850 million in cuts. We've reduced our workforce and we've reduced our indebtedness. So I have experience dealing with the difficult challenges that these kind of budget gaps create. And let me talk about a couple of things that we need to look at. The first is TIF reform. I created TIFs in my ward. They supported affordable housing developments and CHA transformation. But the downtown, which is the most valuable real estate in the city, is in one or another TIF district. This was supposed to be an economic development tool that catalyzed economic development. I don't see why we need TIF districts where we have the most valuable real estate in the city. So we need to unwind these TIFs, bring them to an end. We need to look at taking surpluses from other TIFs. There's revenue there that we can use for general operating. We also need to look at things like workman's comp. We have to look at how we can make government more efficient. At the county level, we have 22,000 employees, and we spend $20 million on workman's comp. The city has 33,000 employees, and it spends 5 times as much. So a lot of the things that I discovered, when you get into office, you bring in your department heads, bureau chiefs, and talk to them about the ways in which you can economize and save money, and you'll find out from them additional things that you need to do. But TIF reform and workman's comp reform are good examples of the kind of things that we need to look to address the challenges we face. And let me just say, the police issue is a real challenge. We need to invest more in our police officers, in their hiring, in their training, in their supervision. We also need to hold them more accountable. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able, because of the pipeline, to address the challenge of these settlements for wrongful death and police misconduct immediately. There's going to be a time period where we're just going to have those other suits working their way through. But we've got to address the challenge going forward, and that concerns police accountability in the ways that I described.
Great, thank you, Madam President. I wanted to circle back on one thing. One of the points the Civic Fed alludes to, it's a hardy perennial for us too, is just this enormous debt which has been handed to the next mayor, and unfortunately the next mayor and the next mayor. How do you plan to tell us, sorry, but we're going to have to keep putting tremendous resources into the pension and other types of debt? I mean, this is going to chew up a huge share of somebody's annual budgets. And for what? You're telling people to pay for for services that were delivered in 2000.
Look, it's a daunting task. There's no question about it. I mean, the pension beast is going to consume virtually everything that we do if we do not get a handle on it. And that's why I say we have to make the case for revenue. We have to generate more progressive sources of revenue. We can't assume that the size and shape and efficiency of city government is what it will be in perpetuity. Look, what I hear from people all over the city is they feel like city government takes their tax dollars, makes it much more difficult to deliver goods and services. And frankly, because of some of the inefficiencies and waste that I've identified, it's like we collect tax dollars in a pile and we light them on fire.
Real fast,
Yeah.
I just want to say, we've got an awful lot of aldermanic candidates who have come before us, and they've basically said, gambling and marijuana, gambling and marijuana, gambling and marijuana. They
yeah,
see
but,
that
I mean,
as
look, the practical,
billions of dollars.
yeah, the practical reality, and you all have spoken to this, is whether it's a progressive income tax, whether it's I favor a city-owned casino, whether it's a marijuana tax, none of those things are going to come online soon enough for us to deal with the dire financial circumstances that we are going to be facing right now, today, which makes the task much more daunting. And again, I'm very much aware of that. But look, I favor those things too. But that's why I think it's critically important that we work with Springfield. The only real lever from a revenue standpoint that the mayor can, well, there are two, but only one that I think is something that is relevant to the conversation. We could impose a soda tax. The mayor can unilaterally do that. I'm not going to do that. I hear about that everywhere I go. But the other thing that the mayor can do, obviously, is raise property taxes. And I don't think in the context of this broken system that has not yet been fixed, that we can even go there as the first line of defense and first option. Yes, of course, TIF reform has to happen. Yes, we should never have allowed Ed Burke to have sole dominion over a $100 million program that is unbelievably inefficient. And again, a big priority has to be finish the audit, let us know where the savings can come. But I'm aware of the fact that this is a big looming crisis that we have to address.
Madam President?
Well, as I
The
said,
debt, the debt monster.
right. Well, as I said, I mean, I'm in favor of a progressive income tax at the state level and raising revenue in a more equitable way. Progressive income taxes are more equitable than sales taxes or property taxes or the other things that are at the discretion of local governments. So I'm in favor of progressive income tax. That revenue, as I said, is shared through the local government distributive fund with cities, towns, and villages. So that's one issue that we need to address. And we need to go to the legislature about the formula that's used for sharing that money, because local units of government need more of those resources. And, you know, look, my experience at the county, again, closing budget gaps of $2.1 billion, $850 million in cuts, reducing our workforce by 13%, reducing our debt by 11%. That's the record that I have.
So where do you see the opportunity for cuts in city government?
Well, I've talked about some things. I've talked about TIF reform. I've talked about workman's comp. But what I found when I was at the county is I brought in the department heads and bureau chiefs and said, we're going to have to make cuts. Tell me what you think you can't do without. Tell me how you think you can make cuts. I mean, the people who run their departments know really what are core services, what are core programs, and what they need to focus on. Bring them in and talk to them. You know, I think without having that kind of conversation, point by point, with department heads and bureau chiefs, it's hard to figure out exactly where you would make the cuts because it's not always apparent externally. But those are the kinds of things you have to do. You have to work with your team to figure out how you're going to do it. It's what I did when I came in to the county, and as I said, we had a gap of $487 million, and we addressed it. $487 million, almost $500 million.
Could I ask,
you.
could I, before we, sorry, before we jump around to the next topic, and please, I don't want to take up a ton of your time, but I just feel like a lot of these answers are very broad and we're going to invest in neighborhoods. And so let me just give you some specific examples. We have all this focus right now on Lincoln Yards. I mean, tons of media attention, tons of city hall time, tons of hearings. You just had 2 super targets close on the south side in Morgan Park and Chatham. You have the Southwork site that has been sitting there with proposals that go up and down, and the mayor puts out a press release, so I'm so sorry, this one didn't work out. You have all these abandoned schools. No one has a really workable idea of what to do with them. Can you briefly address specific, like on the ground issues? What do you do about empty buildings? Target just putting out a press release saying they're leaving. Was there more the mayor's office or the alderman should have done in those cases? Those are on the ground issues for people who live in these communities. What do you do about them? And what has City Hall not done? Because everything I feel you're talking about has been talked about for 20 years and nothing really has visibly
I
change?
think it's really important that we recognize that the mayor has a bully pulpit,
the floor.
and that's the first thing, to speak to this issue and how important it is. You know, the Super Target in Chatham, its closure was never explained by the corporation. But I know that the Chatham community, for example, was one that really suffered from the foreclosure crisis. And so they lost population and lost customers. And that may have been the reason that Target closed. I can't tell you for sure. But I think the mayor has an obligation to get the people who are doing downtown development to help us with the neighborhood side. And I don't mean just making payments in lieu of constructing units for the Affordable Requirements Ordinance. I mean engaging them in helping us build our communities. We have to get the large developers to help us with community development as well. So that's one thing. You know, and I think we have to look at things like the school closures. There were 50 schools that were closed. 38 of them, as I understand from WBEZ reports, are still vacant. And they are a daily reminder to the people who live in those neighborhoods, to the kids who walk by them every day to go to their new school, to the adults who drive by them. They're a daily reminder of a public disinvestment in their community. And so that should have been a priority. Repurposing them, working with community residents, with local elected officials, with corporations to try to figure out who we can get to help us create employment training programs there, to deliver social services there, to deliver perhaps mental health services there. The city closed 7 of its 12 mental health clinics, which has been a nightmare for us at the county because it increased the number of people who came into our emergency room in crisis and the number of people who ended up in jail because they were acting out. But I think the mayor has to engage the business community and engage communities and local elected officials to address some of these challenges and to put, frankly, to put conditions on those who are doing very well with their downtown developments to help us in the neighborhoods and engage them in the community development process that I talked about. And that has to be a community development process. It has to involve local residents, it has to involve aldermen, but it has to involve some of these citywide and national actors who are doing so well on the downtown development side.
Okay, let me jump to Ms. Lightfoot, and I kind of hijacked the conversation, so I don't want to take.
That's all right. I'll try to be as succinct as I possibly can. I think the mayor has to do more than engage business people. I think the mayor has a lead. We have not had a land use plan in the city since 1966. We do not have a comprehensive economic development plan for the city. And what development happens is really left up to the vagaries of developers who frankly don't covet areas south of Roosevelt Road or west of Ashland. And I think that's a real problem. What we need is a comprehensive economic development plan that of course engages the community, of course engages the business community, but it's got to be the city and priorities and vision on where that development can happen based upon conversations and engagement with lots of different folks. But the city has to lead, and that has not happened. We shouldn't have learned about the fact that the Targets were closing when they issued a press release. But also, more to the point, our economic development strategy cannot be dependent upon big box companies coming in and saving us. That's why I made the point before about why it's absolutely critically imperative for us to have small business growth in the neighborhoods. They are going to care more about staying there, and we need to support them and encourage that development. You mentioned Lincoln Yards. I've been very clear about Lincoln Yards. Of course, development is critically important, but Lincoln Yards sits on some of the most lucrative property in the city. It's going to be developed whether we invest a nickel on it or not. The reality is people in those neighborhoods have a right to understand what the impacts are going to be on transportation, on infrastructure, on the schools. If you travel around that neighborhood, which I do, it's damn near impossible now to even get back and forth from east to west. So understanding how that development is going to change the texture and contours of that neighborhood in profound ways is something that frankly should wait to the next mayor and city council, and I've been very clear on that. Similarly with what's going on at the 78. We have to have a process when we invest city dollars that is open, that is transparent, and that respects the lived experience of neighborhoods that are going to be most impacted by the development, and that hasn't happened. You talked about the 38 schools. I think what we ought to be doing is in a conversation with residents in those neighborhoods, which are mostly black and brown, where there's 38 schools remain, how we can turn those schools into community assets, how we can turn them into community schools to meet the needs of people in those neighborhoods who virtually have no community anchors. That's the conversation that we ought to be having.
President Preckwinkle, have you been okay with the process around Lincoln Yards?
No, look, this is a part of our city in which real estate is very hot, the hot real estate market. I think development would take place there without the magnitude of incentives that are being offered to Lincoln Yards folks. But, I think it's important to understand that sometimes using TIF resources to do public infrastructure is a good idea. And the question is whether the level of TIF subsidy in this particular project makes sense given what the public benefits are going to be.
Do you think it should be held off until the next mayor is in place?
Yes, that's what I've said. And I think it's, and just let me say, I think it's really important that there be a very thorough community process. And what's happened in this instance is that there have been multiple changes without a lot of notice to the community in the course of the presentation, and not a chance really for the community to vet those changes. Mm-hmm. And I think that this kind of development it's critical that there be a very robust community process and a very public and transparent process. That's what we need in these instances, a very robust and transparent process. And in the 78, for example, the land there has been vacant for more than a decade. Maybe it's several decades. So it's a different situation. I think this is a case by case basis, but the idea of doing this, rushing things through prior to the new mayor taking office, I don't agree with.
If I can just add one more point, one of the issues of Lincoln Yards, of course, is that the master plan has changed repeatedly over the last even 2 months, 6 weeks. But because of aldermanic prerogative, Brian Hopkins says, well, I get it, I'm good, let's move forward. That is one of the big problems with aldermanic prerogative.
I wanted to make sure we get, there's a hardy perennial, affordable housing, which we hear an awful lot about it this year, as never before, and Alex Rodriguez writes a lot about that. Alex, when we were talking yesterday, you made a point.
Well, there are many neighborhoods on the north and northwest and southwest sides where gentrification is pushing out longtime residents. Can you talk a little bit about 2 or 3 of the most effective ways to bring in affordable housing into these neighborhoods, but initiatives that do not impede the economic growth that these neighborhoods also thrive on?
I'm happy to jump in. I issued a affordable housing plan last fall. It was on the basis of conversations with really various stakeholders that are involved in this area, from commercial developers to community-based developers. I think a couple of key points. One is we're down 120,000 units of affordable housing in the city. Right now, the city of Chicago, using in lieu of fees, only has about 336 units online to be built. That's criminal. The other thing that the news didn't report this, but about 2 weeks ago, the city's inspector general issued a report on how the city is using the in lieu of fees that are part of the Affordable Requirements Ordinance. Literally, hundreds of millions of dollars have been poured into that fund. Amazingly, the city's Department of Planning didn't have a dedicated account into which those monies could be segregated, and so they can't account for those fees. That can't happen. What do we need to do? We need to make sure that the newly constituted housing department actually is focused on getting to yes, to solve this problem and help facilitate actual development of affordable housing. Right now, we've got all this red tape, all the bureaucracy, the city gets in too late in the game, and it makes it impossible for deals to get done. That has to change. Number 2, I go back to, I sound like a broken record, aldermanic prerogative. In 2/3 of the city over the last 15 years, not a single unit of affordable housing has been built. Part of that problem is because the city hasn't led, but part of the problem is aldermanic prerogative. The other thing that we have to do is we have to increase the percentage of on-site affordable housing that's built through the ARO. That's, I think, absolutely essential. And frankly, we got to disincentivize, because I've heard it from developers who are being candid, is it's a better deal for them to pay in lieu of fees right now than it is to actually build. That's a huge problem. I think the other thing that we have to think about is home ownership. We have so many vacant lots, so many dilapidated homes, homeowners who don't have the resources to be able to renovate their homes. We've got to think creatively and reach out to the development community writ large, commercial and community base, to figure out a way that we can better build $100,000 or less homes so that we can really give people the opportunity to invest in the neighborhoods where they live and keep them in the city. So those are some of the things I think we need to do to address the affordable housing crisis that we're in. But we got to recognize it as a crisis because we don't want Chicago to be, frankly, another city where our middle class can't afford to live.
Affordable housing was a priority for me when I was alderman. I spent 19 years focused on rebuilding the communities to the north and west of the community that I lived in, Hyde Park and South Kenwood. So we built 1,500 units of housing, most of it affordable rental housing. The overwhelming majority affordable rental housing. Because my priority was providing housing for working people so that we could keep our working and middle-class families in the city. You know, I know what it takes to do this work. You have to work with community residents, you have to work with mom and pop developers, you have to work with big developers, and we did all that. We worked with folks who were on the block and wanted to do something. We worked with large national firms. We worked with the CHA around CHA transformation. And actually we had 3 CHA transformation developments in my ward where a third of the housing was for public housing residents, a third was market rate, and a third was affordable. You know, the Affordable Housing Requirements Ordinance, ARO, is really challenged because my understanding is in the last 12 years, despite the tremendous amounts of money that have gone into it, only 400 family units have been created. 400 in 12 years. And what I've pledged is that I will bring together developers, both for-profit and not-for-profit, advocates, and community representatives to look at this program to try to figure out how that, and elected officials, to look at this program to figure out how we can make it more effective. Because clearly, 400 family units in 12 years does not constitute success. We've got some real challenges there.
Thank
a developer, I've got a couple more things. A developer came to me and said, we need to change the laws in the state, and I promised to help him in Springfield, so that those who own buildings, big apartment buildings, can devote a portion of them, his suggestion was 20, he said it's an 80-20 program, can devote a portion of them to affordable units and then get their property tax relieved in proportion. I think that's a really good idea, to incent the private market to create more affordable units through property tax incentives. And you know, I also think Paul Vellis had a really good idea about changing the rules about creating garden apartments so that more of our existing apartment buildings can convert some of their basement spaces into affordable units. And finally, the Cook County Land Bank, which we created, and this is Bridget Gaynor and working with our office, has in its possession vacant lots and abandoned homes, which it makes available to small developers and larger developers to convert them from abandoned buildings back into housing that can be sold in the marketplace to homeowners at very reasonable prices. So the Cook County Land Bank is an excellent example of the way in which we can use a government institution to address the challenges that we face around affordability.
Thank you. It's going to be summer. Those bad days are coming. Can each of you talk a little bit about how you're going to address the scourge of gun violence?
Yeah.
We could talk all day about it, and we don't have that time. Give us some idea of your perspective and 1 or 2 innovative ideas, something that we can help judge each of your candidacies by.
You know,
Ms. Preckwinkle.
so I'm a teacher by profession, and early in my teaching career, I lost a student to gun violence. She was on her front porch. She was murdered in a drive-by. And I know what a devastating effect that had on me, on my students, on the staff, all the people who knew her and loved her. People have the right to feel safe in their homes and in their communities. And the only way in which we can really address the violence is to have better collaboration between the police and communities. And in many of our communities, residents are wary of the police because of the history of misconduct, the history of patrolling our communities as if all of our people are criminals. So we've got some real challenges there, and they have to be addressed with better training of our officers, better supervision. You know, the consent decree talks about increasing by 2.5 times the amount of professional development that we have for our police officers, being sure that they're well supervised. The model is 8 officers to 1 sergeant. In some of our districts, we have 30 officers to 1 sergeant. We also have to hold our police department accountable. You know, nationally, for every 100 murders, there's a suspect arrested in 62 or 63 of the cases. In the city of Chicago, it's less than 20%. Depending on who you talk to, it's 15 or 17%. The most violent crimes, the murders and the shootings, we do not have a good record of solving. If you know in your neighborhood that somebody who murdered your friend, your brother, your father, your classmate, has an 8 chances out of 10 of getting away with it, the temptation, of course, is to seek retaliation and retribution. And so that's a real problem. And for shootings, it's even less than 10%. It's 8 or 9% of the shootings somebody's arrested for them. So this is a tremendous challenge in our neighborhoods, and we have to address it through more investments in community policing, and frankly, more investments in our communities themselves. Because the communities that face the most violence are the communities that are most challenged by high levels of unemployment, closed schools, they're food deserts. They have low levels of educational attainment. That's the challenge. It has to be a holistic approach that includes community investment, and also it needs to be viewed as a public health challenge. We know that because we run the health and hospital system, and most of the shooting victims come to Stroger because we've done so well over time in treating them.
Running short on time. Ms. Lightfoot.
All right, I'll try to be as brief and succinct as possible. We put out a comprehensive public safety plan last fall. There are 2 main pillars to it. Obviously, treating the epidemic of violence that we are facing as a public health crisis, and that really is about economic development, but those are not going to get things done and keep our city straight immediately, which is what I understood your question to be. Number 1, as I mentioned, if I'm successful, one of the first calls that I make is to Eddie Johnson to convene a meeting the next day with his leadership team to understand the nuances and parameters of their summer violence strategy. What I know is that, frankly, a lot of the investments that we've made in technology, some commanders aren't using. That's unacceptable. What I also know is that there's not enough aggressive accountability to hold people in the detective division and the patrol division accountable for what's happening in their wards, in their districts. We have to change that. I also know that this is a problem, the gun violence, is because we have way too many guns on the street because of our proximity to Indiana, to Michigan, to Wisconsin, and frankly, the consistent stream of gun trafficking from the southern states. That means that we have to have our federal partners engaged. I will put on my hat as a former federal prosecutor, deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office, not only here, but in the other states that are sources of the guns, to have a proactive plan to go after gun traffickers, felons in possessions, and straw purchasers. We've got to be proactive in stopping the guns from getting here, and then we got to use every tool in our toolkit, including with the community-based organizations that are very effectively involved in violence reduction and stopping retaliatory shootings. But this has got to be a holistic plan where we move forward, but this police department has to do a better and more effective job in leading.
Thank you both. Thank you both for joining us. We're going to close as we did when you were here a few weeks ago. You knock on our door. We're really busy, but you know what? We'll give you a minute. And this is where we apply the Dorothy Brown test, because Dorothy Brown nailed it in 59 seconds on why everyone should vote for her. President Preckwinkle, why should we vote for you?
You know, I have spent the last 30 years of my life in public service, and I'm very proud of it. I've served as alderman for 19 years and Cook County Board Commissioner, president for the last 8. You know, I know how to be an effective leader, and I've been the chief executive for the second largest county in the country for the last 8 years. And in that time period, I've managed budget crises, I've increased the performance of our public health system. We have a public health system that serves 330,000 people and delivers health care, and I believe health care is a right and not a privilege. We've worked on criminal justice reform. Those are big challenges that I've addressed, and big challenges face the city of Chicago. And those challenges are around growth and opportunity. We have to have a city that grows. We cannot continue this population loss. We have to build our neighborhoods. We can't have a city that consists of a glimmering, shining downtown and neighborhoods that are struggling. We have to have balanced development. And we have to have communities where people feel safe in their homes. We cannot have a city in which so many of our residents are fearful of even walking out of their house. So we've got to work on the collaboration and cooperation between police and community. We've got to invest in community policing, and we've got to be sure that all of our residents understand that we're all in this together. These are challenges that are difficult, but they're challenges that we can face together and meet. And I look forward to working with the people of the city of Chicago to meet those challenges.
Thank you. Ms. Lightfoot, why should we vote for you?
Well, I'd say, hello, neighbor. I'm Lori Lightfoot. And if you're same of the same old, if you're sick and tired of a government that's not responsive to you, that isn't reflecting your lived experience, and you want change as I do, then I'm your candidate. I am a leader who is not tied to the broken, corrupt machine. I haven't aspired to climb the ladders of power of that machine. I offer voters in the city an independent reform candidate who is going to transform city government and make it more responsive to people all over the city. We have big challenges that we have to face as a city, but we can't get there if we don't have a leader that people respect, who stands for integrity, who stands for change. I'm that leader, and I want your vote.
Wow, thank you. What an excellent session. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Good luck to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you to you and your staffs.
Thank you.
Jesse, for coming in.
Thank you.